So, there's a little clue there about the bass that I'm reviewing today. This is the Jon Taylor Signature from Dingwall Guitars. So if you don't know who I am, I'm Jon Herrera, and I am happy to join the squad here at Bass Gear Magazine doing some video reviews for them. I've known the guys for a very long time. I am the former editor-in-chief of Bass Player Magazine, and I've been around this stuff for a very long time. Spent much of my career at Bass Player as the technical editor, which meant I was in charge essentially of all the gear coverage we did. So I have reviewed many basses and other bass stuff in my life, and it's something I like to do and I'm good at, and I was so happy to hear that they had a need over at Bass Gear, so here I am. As I said, this is the Jon Taylor Signature bass from Dingwall. And if you don't know who Jon Taylor is, you surely have heard some of his music. Jon Taylor is the bass player in the iconic band Duran Duran. Pop, I guess is what we'd call that. So, for a pop band of that era, Jon Taylor always had some pretty frisky bass lines that really cut. So even if you weren't a fan of the music, there's something you have to really respect about that. In an era where a lot of bands of that ilk were moving to synths, Jon Taylor was always a fierce proponent of the bass guitar and well-deserving of a signature model. And what a signature model it is. I'll tell you a little bit more about what I think about it in a bit, but let's just talk about what's going on here as far as the construction, the design, etc. So off the bat, let me address the most obvious thing that you may be noticing about this instrument. That is the multi-scale fingerboard, fanned fret is another term you might hear. In short, the frets are not parallel. That seems pretty obvious. That's not some problem with your monitor. They are not parallel. So why have a multi-scale bass? In short, the lower strings on a bass, let's say the E and the A strings, but especially on a 5-string when we're talking about the E and the B string, a lower string, they tend to benefit from a long scale length. That's why you'll see a lot of 5 strings that are 35-inch scale out of the box, as opposed to the standard 34. The reason is that the longer the length, the vibrating length of a string, the more rich its overtone characteristics are. So, when we play a note, we are playing the note that we hear, the frequency of the note that we can identify. Let's say I'm playing a G. There's a frequency associated with that G, but the thing that gives that tone and what we call timbre is the unique sort of fingerprint of the overtones that are also existing when I play that note G. You don't necessarily hear them and identify them as the pitch, but they help contribute to the tone of an instrument. On a low string on a bass, it's especially important because one of the things that begins to happen as you play lower and lower on a 4-string and especially a 5-string is you kind of lose some of that definition and clarity. And so one of the ways to bring that out is to have a longer scale length. The only problem with a longer scale length is you now have a longer scale length. You may not have any interest in playing a long bass. Maybe your hands are small, maybe you just find it uncomfortable. I know I often find them uncomfortable. So by having a fanned fret bass like this, we're able to have a scale length that's most appropriate for each string. We don't need that length on the G and D strings as much as we might on the A and E strings. Thus, the E string on this bass is 36¼ inches. So it's 2¼ inches longer than a typical bass. And the G string is a standard 34-inch scale. So off the bat, you might be asking yourself, that is probably like learning an entirely new instrument. That's the same thing that I thought when I first encountered one of these. And I don't know what it is. I certainly could consult with someone that knows more than me about sort of mechanics and body mechanics, but there is something crazy about when you pick one of these up, which is that you get used to it very quickly. I rarely, in the weeks I've had this instrument, have found myself struggling or missing. The only place that it does get weird, and I don't think there's any way around this, is if you tend to play high, and especially if you play a lot of chords up high, it's pretty tough because you can see here the angle of the frets is getting fairly steep there. So like, let's say a minor 7 voicing, which I'm used to kind of my fingers all being in a line across, that'll kind of get me a dominant, but I want this. So I would say as far as the adaptation to multi-scale, that is the part that does require some work or just reconsideration of how you're doing things. But if you're like a lot of players, you barely are up here, I honestly don't think you'll find it as challenging as you might think. So let's talk about the construction of this. This is made primarily in China. So one of the things I was anxious to look at with this bass is where are we at these days with the quality of instruments coming from Asia and particularly China. This is a fairly expensive bass. I've seen the price vary, but it's in the high 2000s, close to 3000. We'll see when this gets published. So that's a fair chunk of change to pay for a bass that's made in China. So that's another thing to be aware of. As far as the materials, so we have a Nyato body. Nyato is a hard tropical wood. I've read that it is somewhat akin to mahogany. Definitely has a little bit of heft. It's not crazy, but there's some density to this body wood. And a maple neck that is actually made from 5 pieces, laminated together. A Pau Ferro fingerboard, which is rosewood-like, a lot easier to get these days and a lot better for the environment. So Pau Ferro. And some Hipshot ultralight tuners, very cool. A Dingwall proprietary bridge, they call the minimalist bridge, and it is a really cool piece of kit right here, this bridge, I dig it. Beyond that, it's a bolt-on. Some of the coolest thing, or one of the coolest things about this bass is the way they've handled the battery compartment. So typically there might be a couple screws. Sometimes there's this plastic hinged door you might be familiar with. Those just never feel very high quality to me, and on a really nice instrument, it just seems off. This is a cool solution. So they carve it out here. This is like a plastic cover, but there's these 2 holes, and that gives your fingers purchase to take it off, and it's magnets. So never lose those little screws. I've lost countless little screws. Oh, and that reveals something about the onboard electronics. We have 2 9 volts in there, so we have an 18 volt onboard preamp. So let's talk about that preamp. I was really excited to get this in part just to check out this preamp. When I saw Sheldon Dingwall, who is the founder of Dingwall Guitars, at the NAMM show, he told me, and I have since verified, that the onboard preamp here is designed by Rupert Neve Designs. So those of you that don't know, Neve is one of the most sort of hallowed, celebrated names in the world of recording and audio engineering. And this is the only instrument on earth that I'm aware of that offers a Neve preamp on board. There's also some really cool synergy with having a Neve preamp on the John Taylor Signature bass because their classic records, including the record that includes Rio, recorded on a Neve recording console. So when a name like Neve enters into our relatively small corner of the gear world onboard preamps, it's pretty exciting, and it is an 18 volt preamp. Another cool thing is what's feeding that cool Neve preamp. So off the bat, it's easy to tell there's something a little unusual about this, other than the fact that the pickups are slanted, of course. That is that there's 3. You don't see that very often, especially 3 soap bar pickups like this. They have neodymium magnets, also cool. This is another proprietary Dingwall design. And I think what's especially interesting about it is that the pickup switching occurs courtesy a rotary switch. So maybe you can hear. So that's not a pot. It's not just continuously variable. There are 4 clear positions. By the way, really nice switch. Really strong detent. The pickup switching goes like this. Bridge pickup soloed, so all the way back. The next notch is these 2 together. So in series. So this is sort of like a kind of a Stingray-esque, Music Man-esque position. The third position, so keeping rotation clockwise, is the outside pickups in parallel. So that's something like a jazz bass, where you have your widely spaced pickups on, working together, wired in parallel. And then finally, that 4th position is the neck soloed. So that's also really cool. There is something I think, potentially lost when you're using, let's say, a volume-volume arrangement or a volume blend. The specifics of why I think that is maybe outside the scope, but I do think a switch might preserve some of the intrinsic sound of each of these positions and give you like 4 legit different sounds. Beyond just the pickup switching, we have volume, straightforward. This is a passive style tone. So just like on a P bass or a jazz bass, rolling it off darkens the sound, low pass filter essentially. Very important, one thing I am always miffed when this doesn't happen, the passive tone is functional in both active and passive modes, which I find to be especially important. Otherwise, we just have a 2-band EQ, bass and treble, and then this big baseball bat switch is our active passive switch. So that's it for the construction. Now let's talk a bit about the playability of this thing. Like I said, the fan fret aspect is not as scary in practice as it may look at first. So to get that out of the way, it's a choice. I mean, you have to kind of be interested and open to that. But when it comes down to playing it, it just doesn't seem to be a very big deal. One of the things that makes it less of a big deal has to do with the way this bass sits. First of all, very few basses balance this well. I don't know if it's a lot of things. It's the length of the body, it's the lightweight headstock with these cool hip shot too. All of these things are working in concert. This bass balances as well as any bass possibly could. I'm not doing anything to keep it there. I'm not having to use my forearm. I'm not holding it up with my left hand. Love that. And that kind of suggests that what I said about the body length kind of suggests why I think it's also very approachable despite the multi-scale. And that is that with the bridge so far back in this direction, it places my hand in the lowest possible position, this F here, pretty close to my face. There's a lot of instruments like a typical bass where it's more here. And if it was a 36.25 inch scale bass, which this E string is, that would kind of feel here. And this is why often I don't like really long scale basses, because I end up with my wrist kind of like this. It just doesn't feel right to me. So from a sort of ergonomic balance, these sorts of things, it's just dialed in. I mean, small aside, Sheldon Dingwall, one of the cats when it comes to designing and building instruments. His stuff is always beautiful and really functional and attends to these more subtle things like balance, playability, how it fits with your body really well. He's definitely one of the guys that really knows what he's doing in this space. So not surprised that it has that quality. So I'm going to run through some of the tones just soloed, and then we'll try it with some music. Let's start with the bridge pick. So this is the bridge pickup soloed. So the switch is all the way toward the bridge pickup, tone all the way up. So no cut going on. EQ is flat. We're in active mode. And I'm just gonna play some stuff. So one of the things off the bat that I feel in playing this is it's very solid. It has, if you played as many basses as I have, you kind of, I don't want to overstate my abilities, but there is something that you can just feel when you're in the presence of an instrument that's been made well and made thoughtfully from good stuff. It just feels put together, something in the way it resonates in your hand. Another thing, I love the small fret wire, the mandolin fret wire here. That's a personal preference of mine. But yeah, it's just... Also, the fact that I'm not having to keep it up is really nice, from a technique point of view. The tone is really focused, clear. These are Dingwall nickel strings, by the way. Focused, clear, and one thing that I really am hearing is the sort of balance and evenness and string to string, position to position, sort of up and out of that lower register, it just kind of holds together. It sounds, see, I'm in fan fret land. It just feels coherent, right? So that's the bridge pickup position. And that's going to be your, that kind of stuff. Quick, articulate, Jocko-ish. Let's move to this position. So this is the bridge and middle pickup together in series, our sort of Stingray style position. Obviously, there's a little bit jump in gain there. That's those two wired in series. And yeah, it kind of evokes some of that Stingray-ness. It has a little bit of that feeling of kind of slightly hyped bass and treble. E's, A, D, G, there's the open string. And yeah, it really holds together on chords. And of course, because we're in Stingray land, this is going to be probably a preferred setting for a lot of you for clap. Yeah, holds together. It's got some mids in it that a Stingray doesn't have. It's got some of that thickness and color and texture in the mids. Again, the evenness. Cool. All right, so here we have the third position. This is the outside pickups in parallel. It's like a blended jazz sound. Probably another good slap sound. Let's just go back to back with those since I was just slap. We've lost a lot of output, but we've gained a real sheen. A little more scoopy too. I'll behave myself. Yeah, that's a really cool sound. That to me feels a really good all-purpose sound. It's got the fullness in the lows and it's got that cut. So yeah, I'll dig that one. A little more delicate, a little more nuanced, a little more elegant than those other positions. And finally, we have the neck position. So this is gonna probably have some of that bark and woody bite. Yeah, so we've kind of begun to have a little more energy in the mid-range, in the low mids. The treble's been sort of attenuated a bit. And that low mid kind of density gives it that kind of snarl, right? Really cool. So now I'm going to start to tweak a bit. Now I'm not going to go through every position of every knob and every position. That's just outrageous. But I will try to find some tones that I think are cool. So maybe sticking in this position, which again is, has that thump and bite and is kind of P-ish, right? We're sort of in a P-like position. So I'm going to cut the treble using the tone control and see where we get. We get a smoothed out, more trad sound. I mean, it's not a P bass, but it's got a little bit of that creamy, especially with the tone off. And these strings are, I think, relatively fresh, so some of that will kind of diminish as the strings age. Yeah, I like that sound. Another usable tone, and kind of one of those sounds that belies what the impression that some people may have of this bass, just even looking at it, knowing nothing about Dingwall, which is that, oh, this is going to be some kind of super modern, bright, crispy, brittle sounding bass. But no, it has lots of sounds in it. I'm going to actually goose this even more and start to use this EQ. So let's bring a little bass in. Now, one of the things I really dig about this preamp is even with the filters dimed, so this is the bass dimed, that's a perfectly legitimate sound. Very cool. So yes, the EQ, by no surprise, given the heritage of the design, sounds great. Let me back into that jazz bass style, outside pickups in parallel, flatten out the EQ. Tone, let me get the tone off all the way. A little bit of bass boost, I guess. Cut the treble a bit. And again, I'm looking for kind of an all-purpose, you got a pop gig, you got to do a wedding gig. Can you cop Al Green tune at the same time you can cop whatever, the latest Bruno Mars song? I mean, it's a really cool bass. Another great sound. Definitely that mid-range presence. So it does have I'm not trying to suggest this can do everything. It has a kind of signature stamp regardless, which I would characterize as a kind of nice and rich and colorful mid-range, which is where a lot of the tone of an instrument lies. But that's a great tone. I'm gonna boost the bass and cut the treble even more. And this feels like a little bit of a more even, a little more present version of what I was doing with the neck pickup. And up here, you know, if you're a soloist, I'm gonna miss a bunch up here, more than usual. Yeah, God, it's just a cool bass. I'm just enjoying playing it, which is not true for every bass I encounter. If you're into metal, if you're into heavy music, then this bass probably doesn't need an introduction. Yes, this is the Jon Taylor, the guy from Duran Duran signature bass, but Dingwall is, in my very informal survey of the handful of metal bass players I know, and then of course looking at stuff online, this is the bass to get. Not necessarily this model, but Dingwall. So with that in mind, I got myself a pick here. And not to say that everyone who plays metal plays with a pick, but it's obviously pretty common in that style. And I'm just gonna find a tone that I think works for me. Let's see, I got everything flat for now, tone up, and let's try that Stingray, that aggro setting. So that would be the second position from the all the way counterclockwise. Yeah, one thing I can tell off the bat, because of that 36 and a quarter inch scale, like the string just feels like it's really holding together. It's taut. You can deal with all these downstrokes. Position's nice. I don't feel uncomfortable as far as where my hand is. Definitely because of the pickup position, particularly the bridge pickup, and the relatively little distance between it and the bridge. There's not a ton of room between there, so you are going to end up hitting the pickup, which I don't mind. It's just something that if you're accustomed to, like, let's say you're playing a P bass or something, and there's all that space there, you don't have that. And as I move toward the neck, you can hear the sound kind of round off. So another thing with the long scale length, especially on the E string, is there will be even more variety in sound, in tone between the furthest back toward the bridge and the neck, which is true finger style and true with the pick. Let's try that same setting, but I'm gonna throw some distortion on because, you know, I'm in a band that plays some heavy music sometimes. I love the distortion thing. Let's see how this responds with distortion. So this is a Dark Glass Micro Tubes B7K Ultra. Pretty dope. I like that setting. Let me try one more. This is the neck pickup soloed. Boost a little bass. Keep that tone up. Wow, really cool. Whole other flavor. So it's putting out a lot of harmonics and a really well-textured, rich sound for the distortion to start doing stuff with. Definitely plays nice with distortion. Let's try a little finger style with distortion. Take the tone off. Very cool, very cool. Okay. So I hope that was a good and useful introduction to this great instrument. It really is a nice bass. And to answer my original question of sorts that I started with, which is what's going on with basses made in China today, if this is any testament to it, we're in a really good place as far as what's coming out there. Now, that doesn't mean every manufacturer who's building things in China is going to reach this level of quality. I know Sheldon goes out there, he works with the factory out there to make sure that they're doing things the way he wants, and then they get shipped to Canada, and he takes a look there and makes sure everything's cool. So that is a process that not everyone is going to go through, but as far as this instrument is concerned, I can't fault it. I mean, it doesn't have certain fancy qualities that you might find in a high-end instrument that's made by hand by an individual that you can ring up on the phone. But as far as just being a great solid bass that delivers a lot of really good tones, it certainly has that in spades. So who's this for? I mean, if you want to get into the fanned fret thing, the multi-scale thing, and you play 4, and there, by the way, there is a 5 available, I hear. This, it's kind of hard to find. I mean, this is about as good as it gets on the entry level. It's built to an incredibly high standard. Everything just works well. It's got this really, really dope Neve preamp. It balances well. The playability is nice. It feels solid. It resonates. It's not too bad weight-wise. It's really a matter of whether this bass is for you is really a matter, of course, of cost and whether or not you can get into the multi-scale thing. Like I said, up high, chords, soloing, that's going to take getting used to. But down here where we make most of our money, totally fine, super easy to adapt to. It's a really cool instrument. I mean, I've never been a fan fret fan. I wasn't against it, but I just kind of didn't see the value. But having spent this much time with this instrument, I do understand the appeal. There is something about, especially for me, for the way I play, the evenness, the sort of note-to-note evenness in timbre and clarity, and the feeling that you get when you're playing that is pretty legit and is pretty persuasive reason to at least have one of these in the arsenal. And lest you think this is just like a metal thing, I mean, those of you that know Dingwall probably know that it's big in the metal thing, as I said. Not at all. It can do a lot of really, really useful trad tones. Now, it's not a Fender. It's not going to give you like a really, really kind of authentic vintage style sound. It has a kind of presence and clarity that is objectively better, I guess, in terms of frequency response and all these other metrics. Music's music. So, the dead spot on a P bass on the 6th fret of the G string, that might be a vibe. So I don't want to claim that it can take that territory. It maintains its kind of modern origin, regardless of what you're doing with it. But it certainly can cop all the tones you might need for any gig, I can imagine. And, guys like Lee Sklar, for example, play Dingwall, and John Taylor plays Dingwall. And Jon Taylor's definitely not in a metal band. Final comment is I just love the look of it. I mean, The finish is gorgeous. It's this kind of metal flake sparkle, and then it's got these great stripes. It's got the Rio I here at the 12th fret, just to indicate that you are, in fact, a Jon Taylor or Duran Duran fan. So that's the Dingwall John Taylor Signature. Until next time, I'm Jonathan Herrera for Bass Gear Magazine, and thanks for checking this out.